All right, time to move along. We told you earlier in the show we're close to the midway point, so we're going to do some midterm grades for first-year head coaches. All right, we have a bunch we need to get to, so we're going to hit 5 today. If we don't get to your coach, we'll get to it here in just a minute. So don't worry. We're tomorrow or a couple days from now. Don't worry. We're going to get there. I promise you, okay? But, Coobs, let's kick it off. Midterm grades.
All right, midterm grades, first-year coaches. We're going to start with a tough one here. You talked about it a little bit. What grade would you give Brent Venables at Oklahoma?
A D. Because it's not a failing grade at this point, because there have been bright moments. That's I think, what's most troubling about this team. You watch them against Nebraska, and you watch their defense against Nebraska, and how they were flying around and making tackles in the open field, and how Nebraska did some nice things early in the game, but man, they closed the door, right? It's alarming to me just how different things are. And I know they've lost a couple quality players. Like Billy Bowman being out is significant. He's very, very important to the back end. But I think it's going to be very important. I mean, here's the thing that was most troubling to me. I'm looking over and I'm watching Oklahoma play against Texas. I'm calling the game. And Texas is utilizing tempo, okay? They're running tempo on offense, and it's not lightning speed, but it's pretty fast. It's to the point where it's like, all right, you got to get going. Oklahoma probably on 2 or 3 different occasions is still looking at the sideline waiting for the call, and Texas is snapping the football. Like, that can't happen, man. I mean, like, by the way, you don't have an excuse. Your offense runs tempo, so like you see it every day in practice. Like, it's not like it's not like this is new. So here's the biggest thing about Brent Venables, though, right now is like he can still be successful. Like, people are like, oh, it's like, dude, he can still be successful. They have to get better players. I mean, ultimately, like I know that that's not a cool thing to say, and I know that like, hey, it's not personal. Like, it's just they are not very talented on defense, and that is an issue. And that's going to take a couple years to get there. The good news is now in the portal world, like, you can get there a little bit faster. But the problem is it's going to take a little bit of time, I think, because it's a very complex system. There's a system that does an awful lot, and they're going to bust things occasionally because of how much he tries to do defensively. That's great and all, but it's just they don't really have a defensive identity right now either. So offensively, I think they'll be fine. I think you got to be more willing to cut it loose, even if your backup quarterback's in the game. But offensively, I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep over him. Defensively, man, this is not going to be just a wave the magic wand solution, and that's Brent Venables' bread and butter. That side of the ball has got to be better. So at this point, I don't know how you can give it anything other than a D.
All right, that's fair. Moving on to Baton Rouge. What midterm grade do you give Brian Kelly, coming off of his second worst home loss as a head coach?
You love twisting the knife as just an Irish homer.
I'm just
love it.
Giving you a stat.
It's
his second worst head loss.
I'm just telling you love it. So hey, look, you're
worst.
You are on the cusp of being, you towards Brian Kelly is comparable to that of Oklahoma fans towards Lincoln Riley. It's comparable. I'm not saying it's the same. I'm not saying
I'm happy. I'm not. There's no ill will towards Brian Kelly. I just gave you a fact. It's the second worst home loss of his head coaching career.
I don't recall you making anything. Did you say anything after Venables when you teed that one up?
No, because you couldn't say that one's we don't need to pour salt on the wound on that. All right, I'm with you. Came in with a D. I mean,
like I said, and I'm sad. Like, I want Oklahoma to do well. Like, I want everyone to win. Like, I really do. I hate it when teams play poorly, and it bums me out. It really does. Speaking of playing poorly,
there's the transition. Garrett is all right.
Yesterday was a pretty bad day for the LSU Tigers. It was. I mean, it was a rough one. Here's my problem. It's a B- right now. Okay. It probably, had they played yesterday more competitively, we're sitting there looking at, a B. The thing I'll say about Brian Kelly is this team prior to last week, from week 1 to week 5, had gotten better, a little bit better, and a little bit better, and a little bit better, and a little bit better. Like they'd improved in some form or fashion from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And then it all came crashing down. Defensively, they did not do a good job against the run. Thought they would, did not. They didn't run the ball very well themselves. They ran for just 55 yards on 28 carries. That's a good, solid 2 yards per carry. A little bit less than 2 yards per carry if we're splitting hairs there. But it ultimately, what I've been most disappointed in is that this receiver core has been very unimpressive. Relatively speaking, Malik Neighbor's been great. I'm not sure anyone's cost themselves more money than Kayshon Boutte at this point. The guy's dropped 6 passes this year already, had another drop this past week, came in having dropped 1/5 of the balls thrown his way. That's the highest mark in the Power 5. So, I mean, but ultimately, Brian Kelly, I think this team has improved. And that's why I think it's still a solid grade of B. But yesterday's performance dropped him just a hair. So that would be, one of the 12 quizzes. He just failed that one quiz. So I think that for the most part, he's done a pretty dang good job, though, here in year number 1 and making sure this team takes little steps each and every week. We'll see what they do. Did they bounce back this week when they go on the road in the swamp and play against a Florida team that's coming off of a solid performance against Missouri?
All right, moving on to Notre Dame. What midterm grade do you give Marcus Freeman in year 1?
Just for you, an F. No, I'm just kidding. I think Marcus Freeman, after quite a bit of scrutiny right in the start and how they didn't play well, they hung in there and battled against Ohio State. Who's played Ohio State better, I might add, than Notre Dame? Nobody. No one's even been close, by the way, to how well they've played against Ohio State. Ohio State's been running roughshod through anybody. Well, losing 21-10 is not terrible, right? Not terrible at all. I know you're Notre Dame and there are no moral victories, but here's the rest of the scores for Ohio State: 49-10, 49-20, 52-21, 77-21, and 45-12. So no one's even been close when it comes to staying within striking distance of the Buckeyes, except for Notre Dame. So ultimately, that's a pretty good performance. You look at the game against Marshall, that was a hangover game. No doubt about it, because this team defensively has been excellent really since that point. Since that game, yes, they gave up some yards to North Carolina, but who hasn't? I mean, Drake May is maybe playing as well at quarterback as anybody in college football, but they found a way to get that win. The offense looked really nice in the process. And this win this past week against BYU, that is a really solid win. You look at this game against Stanford and UNLV coming up the next 2 weeks, you're looking at what's likely to be a 5-game winning streak. No disrespect to UNLV, they're improved. No disrespect to Stanford, they're Stanford. Notre Dame should be looking at 5-2 prior to them playing your team, your other team, Syracuse. So, look, a lot still on the schedule. Clemson still comes to them. This grade right now is a B, but it could actually get better. And based on how things went in the first 2 weeks, it's pretty amazing to see where they're at. All right, let's move on now. Where are we at now, Coobs?
All right, next one here. Lincoln Riley at USC. What is his midterm grade?
How can it be anything other than an A? I mean, it's been phenomenal. And what I've been most impressed with, too, so much about, Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams and the excitement that you're going to get from the offensive side of the football. We knew they'd score points, right? That was not really a huge surprise. But what Alex Grinch is doing on the defensive side and how they're playing complementary football, and it hasn't been perfect. I mean, let's not get it twisted, right? This team kind of lived by way of the turnover there early on, and that's difficult to sustain. but now they're attacking the quarterback. They're making it difficult, I think, on opposing offenses because of their penetration that they can create up front. I've been very impressed with how improved and how clean the operation is offensively too. I mean, just very clean, crisp. And the offensive line, I think, is much better than I've seen an offensive line look for SC in a while. I mean, there's just a lot to like about what they're doing. Now, I don't think they're the best team in the Pac-12. A lot of people think that they are. I lean just ever so slightly in favor of UCLA. But I think SC is playing at a really high level of football. And that battle in LA, down the road here a little bit, those two teams are still where I think they could potentially be. That's going to be a hell of a game between USC and UCLA. So I love very much how well they're playing. And I think part of it, too, I probably shouldn't have this takeaway, but you look at what Oklahoma's struggling with and what SC is doing. Oklahoma kind of stuck in the mud, having a difficult time. SC's thriving. So you just see his value and you see just how good he is. And this is going to be a program that's going to be in the mix like this every year, probably from here until the end of time, as long as Lincoln's there.
All right, last one for today's midterm grades. Sonny Dykes at TCU. What grade do you give Sonny Dykes?
It's an A right now. I mean, they are real, man. I mean, you watch
not
them.
An A plus. What else
plus,
is the guy got to do?
An A plus. I don't care. Give him an A plus. I'm fine with me. All right, A plus, because here's what I'm most impressed with. One, this is the theme of the day, by the way. He's got a backup quarterback in the game. All right. So Max Duggan, though, is thriving, absolutely thriving. I think that this was a great situation, and Bear and I talked about this in the preseason. TCU was my, probably one of my sleeper teams. And I liked the hire, and I love Gary Patterson. I love him. He's one of my favorite guys. He recruited me. Like, I've known him for 20 years, nearly, and appreciate everything he did at TCU. But I do think things just got a little bit stale there at the end. And that happens, by the way. Anytime you're at a place for 20 plus years, things are going to get just the tiniest bit stale. Well, in comes Sonny Dykes, and they have excellent personnel at wide receiver. They have excellent quarterback. Max Duggan is playing phenomenal football. The offensive line has been fairly impressive. Yeah, they gave up a couple hits to Kansas yesterday, but they've been pretty good. I mean, if you watch them against Oklahoma, I mean, they were moving guys off the football. And then defensively, granted, yes, there are some things that need to be cleaned up. I would not say it's a great defensive football team, but there have been moments where you look at them, it's like, oh, okay. I mean, they kind of layer some pressures. The best example was probably in the Oklahoma game. Thought they did a pretty dang good job in that game of being kind of relentless, flying around, layering pressures, making it kind of difficult for both Davis Bevel and for Dylan Gabriel when he was in there in the first 20 minutes of that ball game. So very, very impressed with everything that's been done there at TCU, but it felt like it was primed for this success. This team felt ready to spring, and I'm not at all surprised that he has had the success he's had here in the first few weeks of the season. Here's the issue with Sonny Dykes. I think Sonny's a really good coach. I think he's going to do a great job at TCU. I'm very optimistic, but this has not been a team that's played well in late October and November. I'm not talking about TCU. I'm talking about Sonny Dykes' SMU teams. So yes, last year, for example, starts the season 7-0, loses 4 of his last 5. Look back 2019. Granted, that was a while ago. Starts the season 8-0, lose 2 out of 3. Next thing you know, they end up losing 3 of the last 5, finishing 10-3. Start 8-0, finish 10-3. So he needs to do a better job, I think, down the stretch because his teams at times have run out of gas. So A+ up to this point, but from this point moving forward, that's when we're really going to evaluate what Sonny Dykes is and where he's advanced as a head coach.